They didn't throw stones, but they didn't need to. The stares were sharp enough. Ever since the duel, Mary Hensley walked through the village like a ghost that refused to vanish, her black veil fluttering in the wind like a flag no one dared salute. Her husband, Thomas, had fallen with steel in his chest behind the mill house, the blood seeping into the earth before the morning bells rang. But it wasn't just the duel that scarred the town, it was the whispers that followed. "She put him up to it," they said, pushed him into another man's blade just to be free. Mary said nothing, not when the butcher stopped giving her meat, not when the reverend failed to call. She merely kept her late husband's home in order, swept ash from a cold hearth, tended a garden no longer harvested, and sewed by candlelight for no one but herself. She had no family left, no child, no comfort, only the memory of a man who had loved her too hard, too loud, and far too often with bruises behind closed doors. But no one had asked about that. No one ever had. One evening, while collecting herbs near the docks, she saw him. A man with salt-worn hands and boots patched with leather not native to this coast. He was unloading crates from a battered schooner, moving with the easy rhythm of someone who had weathered both storm and silence. When her basket slipped, spilling lavender into the mud, he was the only one who stooped to help her. "You've a careful hand," he said, gently brushing the stems clean. "But you're carrying more than herbs, I'd wager." Mary didn't respond, only met his gaze, steady and unflinching. It was the first time in months someone had looked at her without accusation. He offered no questions, only a nod, and returned to his ship without waiting for thanks. That night, Mary couldn't sleep. Not from guilt, but from the strange warmth that lingered in her chest. As if someone had seen her, and not just the story tied to her name. She didn't know the sailor's name, only that he didn't flinch from shadows, and that might be the beginning of something she hadn't dared believe in for a very long time. His name was Elias Ward, though most just called him the Quiet. He'd sailed from Liverpool to Lisbon, from Caribbean waters to icebound Norse harbours, but it was the grey fog of English villages he found hardest to navigate. He'd come to Grendale for timber and salt pork, nothing more. But the way the townsfolk stiffened when the widow passed had caught his eye. They looked at her like a cursed bell, tolling a death no one wanted to answer for. Yet she didn't shrink. She moved with the stillness of stone and the ache of someone who'd carried too much too long. Elias had seen war, seen men torn by cannon fire and tempests, but something in Mary's eyes unsettled him more than any squall. So when he saw her again, 3 days later by the docks, trading a spool of thread for dried barley, he spoke. "Storm's easing," he said, "or at least not blowing in your direction today." She raised an eyebrow but didn't smile. "They say storms only wait," she replied. He chuckled, low and rough. "Then we should enjoy the still while we have it." She tilted her head. "You don't know who I am." "I know who you are to them," he said, "but I've never trusted crowds." That made her pause, not because he was wrong, but because it had been so long since someone admitted to seeing past the noise. That evening, he left a bundle by her door. Nothing grand. Just smoked fish, half a loaf, and a note. No debt, no favour, just peace. Mary stood at the threshold for a long time before bringing it inside. She didn't eat right away. She stared at the handwriting, the straight lines of a man who didn't rush. And when she finally tasted the fish, she closed her eyes, not from hunger, but from the strange safety of it. The next morning, she passed him near the market square. He didn't approach her, he only tipped his cap and kept walking. She watched him go, the warmth returning like an ember beneath ash. Not love, not yet. but the first kindness without strings she'd known since before her vows were inked, and Mary, for the first time in her widowhood, allowed herself a breath that didn't feel borrowed. It had been sealed in wax and dust, tucked beneath a loose floorboard under the bed she no longer slept in. Mary hadn't touched it since the week after the duel, the week the town turned its back, and the silence inside her house began to echo louder than grief. The letter was from Thomas, her late husband, written in the uneven scrawl he used only when drunk or furious. She'd meant to burn it, but something in Elias's quiet offering had stirred an old corner of courage, the one that still believed in truth. So she pulled it free. The parchment crackled like brittle leaves as she unfolded it. The words spilled like poison. If I die in this duel, it will be your fault. You made me weak. You made me feel less than a man. He had signed it not with love, but with a stain of ale that had bled into the ink. Mary read it once, then twice, and on the third time, she didn't cry. She exhaled. That night, she brought it to the dock, standing by the edge where the lanterns swung low over the water. Elias was there, as always, mending rope with calm fingers. She didn't speak, just held out the letter. He took it, read it slowly, his jaw tightening. When he looked up, she braced herself for judgment, but he said only, "That man died the moment he wrote this." The rest was just noise. She wanted to thank him. Instead, she whispered, "No one believed me." "You don't need them to," Elias replied. "You just need to stop carrying what was never yours." She stared at the river, the letter trembling in her hand. Then she let it go. The paper fluttered, hovered, and vanished into the tide. For the first time, her chest didn't feel like stone. Later, as they sat on overturned crates beneath the stars, Elias told her about a port in Devon where women ran the docks and names were earned, not inherited. "No one cares where you came from," he said, "only how you walk forward." Mary looked at him, not smiling, not weeping, just steady. "Then maybe I'll go where I'm not watched," she said, "only seen." And Elias nodded. "When you're ready." Because he wasn't rescuing her, he was waiting for her to choose her ship. He appeared in the bakery first, flashing coin and charm, his red waistcoat crisp as dried blood, and his boots too clean for dockside mud. Mary saw him through the window as she bartered for flour, and though she'd never met him, her spine stiffened. Some men don't need an introduction to be recognized. He called himself Mr. Pell, claimed to be a friend of Thomas, though Thomas had never spoken of him. "I heard of your loss," he said, his smile thin and syrupy. "Terrible thing. Duels often leave loose ends." Mary didn't answer. She turned to leave, but his voice followed like oil slicking stone. "I also heard you found new company." That stopped her. She faced him, steady. "And if I have?" "Only that grief shouldn't make one reckless. Some stories can't be rewritten, no matter how charming the sailor." He tipped his hat and left, leaving the scent of tobacco and something colder behind. Mary walked straight to the dock. Elias was coiling rope, but he saw her approach and stood tall, eyes alert. "He's come, hasn't he?" She nodded. "Someone Thomas owed, or someone who thinks I still owe him." Elias didn't speak right away then. They always send someone in red before they come with fire. That night, someone slashed the sailcloth on Elias's boat, left no note, no message, just ruin. Mary stood beside him in the lantern glow, watching the torn fabric ripple in the breeze like a warning. "We go now," he said. "I can fix it at sea." "What if they follow?" she asked. Elias looked at her, calm as ever. "Then let them. But they'll be chasing someone who isn't running anymore." Mary returned home in silence and packed what little she had. Her mother's brooch, her sewing needle, the tin box of herbs no one in the village wanted but always secretly needed. Before dawn, she stood outside the door once more, looked back, and didn't flinch. The house had never been a home. It had been a prison with lace curtains. Elias waited by the dock, the repaired sail already hoisted. "You ready?" he asked. "Not yet," she replied, "but I'll never be if I stay." She stepped aboard. The wind caught the sail, the dock drifted away, and the village, the stairs, the silence, the blame, became a speck swallowed by sea. The cabin was small, bare boards, a rope cot, a single porthole that looked out onto nothing but sky and salt. But it was hers. Elias had cleared the space without a word, hanging a lavender sachet from the beam as if to say, "You belong here." Mary stood in the doorway a long while, hand on the frame, unsure if she was allowed to exhale. The floor tilted gently beneath her feet, the sea murmuring like it was breathing with her. It was nothing like the house she'd left. No polished teacups, no ticking clock that marked her husband's footsteps. Just wood, water, and air. She spent the first hours coiling ropes, mending canvas, trying to earn the space she occupied. Elias didn't stop her. He only handed her tasks when he saw her watching. "The wind doesn't care who holds the line," he said, "just that it's held." By evening, she sat beside him on the deck, sharing hard bread and pickled onions, her hair tangled and salt-kissed. "I don't know how to start over," she said, her voice quiet. Elias looked out at the fading sun. "You don't start over," he replied. "You carry less." The next morning she rose before him. She opened the supply chest, found scrap cloth and thread, and began to stitch. Not for money, not for duty, just to remember that her hands still knew how to make something whole. By the end of the week, the ship felt less like escape and more like a story beginning again. The sea no longer frightened her, it thrilled her. Its endlessness meant she could be anyone. One night, a storm rolled in fast. Sharp winds, angry waves. Elias took the helm, and Mary held the lines with knuckles white and teeth clenched. When a wave crashed over the bow, nearly tossing her to the rail, she laughed. Not because it was funny, but because fear didn't own her anymore. When the skies cleared, Elias looked at her, soaked and breathless. "Still want to go back?" She wiped her face, chest heaving. "I don't even remember how." He grinned. "Good." And as stars reappeared overhead, she stood barefoot on the slick deck and whispered to the wind, "This is mine. The ship, the air, the future. No man's name, no traded life, just Mary." It was a smuggler's bay, carved into the cliffs of the southern coast. No flag, no church bells, no questions. Boats came and went with fish, salt, letters no postmaster saw. The people there didn't ask for lineage. They looked you in the eye and judged by how you carried your own weight. Elias called it drift end. Mary called it the first place that didn't flinch when she walked through. They docked just before sunset. As Elias negotiated provisions, Mary wandered the narrow lanes between stacked crates and open fires. A girl no older than 15 sold fish from a wheelbarrow. A boy with a wooden leg played fiddle like it was his voice. At a stall lined with battered books, Mary paused. The vendor looked up. "Looking for something forgotten?" he asked. "No," she said, "something I've never known." She chose a volume of old folk songs, verses about waves, death, freedom. That night, in a rented room above the harbour, she read them aloud by candlelight. Elias sat nearby, whittling a chess piece, letting her voice fill the space. "You sound like someone who remembers joy," he said. She didn't reply, but inside, something shifted. The next morning, she offered to trade her sewing skills for goods. Repairs on sails, mending torn cuffs. The locals tested her. A loose hem here, a ripped net there. She fixed them all. By week's end, they trusted her, called her the straight stitch, a compliment in their tongue. Drift End wasn't freedom in the grand sense. It still had dangers, thieves, drink, storms that came unannounced. But Mary knew now that freedom wasn't the absence of threat. It was the absence of ownership. She was not the widow, not the whisper, not the blame. She was just Mary. On the 7th day, Elias took her to a cliff's edge at dawn. Below them the ocean curled like a sleeping beast. "We don't have to stay," he said, "or go. That's the beauty of it." She looked at him. This man who had never tried to save her, only offered her oars. "I want to build something," she said softly. "Not run, not hide, just begin." He nodded. "Then let's begin." And as gulls cried overhead and the sea whispered to the shore, Mary realized this wasn't a chapter. It was page 1. He arrived with the tide, a traveller cloaked in civility, his coat clean, his boots polished, a journal tucked beneath one arm. He said he was a tradesman looking to chart new markets, but Mary saw it in his eyes the moment he stepped off the boat. Recognition, not of Elias, not of Drift End, of her. He didn't approach immediately. He watched her from afar for 3 days, bought bread from the same stall, lingered near her sewing table, offered cordial nods that held just a fraction too much calculation. On the 4th morning, he brought firewood. "A gift," he said, placing the bundle gently by her door. "You looked cold yesterday." Mary stared at the wood, then at the man. "You're from Grendale," she said. He smiled, thin and proper. "I was, before the air turned sour with rumours and good names went to ash." She didn't invite him in, but she didn't close the door either. "What do you want?" He sighed theatrically. "You misunderstand. I want nothing but clarity. The people back home. They wonder what became of the widow. They say she vanished with the sailor. Took more than grief when she left." Mary didn't flinch. "They can wonder. But some might come looking," he continued, his voice oily. "Those who think stories left unfinished are dangerous." She crossed her arms. "And you?" "You finish stories?" He hesitated. "I tidy them." That night she told Elias everything. He didn't interrupt. When she finished, he said only, "We leave at sunrise." But Mary shook her head. "Number. We've run far enough. If they want to call me something, let it be by name." She lit the fire herself, stacked the gifted wood, and sat beside it, sewing by candlelight, the flames crackling like applause for her decision. When the man returned the next morning, he found her seated in front of the stall, surrounded by locals whose clothes bore her careful stitching. He stepped forward, prepared to charm. She stood first. "This is Drift End," she said loudly. "And here, I'm not a scandal. I'm a seamstress, a sailor's friend, a voice." The crowd watched him, silent, waiting. He stepped back. The bluff had failed. He left with the next tide. Mary didn't smile as he vanished, but Elias did. "You didn't just stay," he said. "You stood." And this time she smiled. "Now they'll know exactly where to find me, and still never touch me again." It began as scraps, odd pieces of sailcloth, old linen aprons, thread dyed with crushed berries. Mary hadn't planned to make anything permanent. It was just a way to keep her hands busy between storms. But as the quilt grew beneath her needle, so did something else. A quiet timeline of all that had brought her here. One patch was from the skirt she wore the day Thomas died. Another from Elias's first coat, now threadbare. A sliver of blue cotton belonged to the little girl whose doll she'd repaired last week. And in the corner, stitched by firelight, was a phrase she whispered to herself as she worked. "I was not what they said I was." The villagers noticed. Some admired. One offered coin. Another, more bold, offered trade, a whole crate of sugar for the finished piece. Mary smiled politely and declined. "It's not for sale," she said. "It's not for warmth. It's for memory." One evening, Elias found her dozing beneath it on the dockside bench. He didn't wake her. He simply sat beside her, laying his hand atop the folded corner where her words rested. When she stirred, she asked, "Do you think it's foolish, holding on to pieces?" He shook his head. "Number not, when you stitch them back together." The next morning, word came that the village was holding a market festival, a yearly event Mary had never dared dream of attending. But this year she took her place among the stalls, not just to sell, to tell. Each item she'd made had a story pinned beside it. A shirt sewn during a thunderstorm, a scarf mended for a grieving boy, a bag made from the same cloth that once wrapped smoked fish. The first kindness she received in silence. People came not just to buy, but to read, and then to ask, and finally, to understand. Near the end of the day, an older woman approached the quilt. She didn't ask its price. She simply touched it, tears in her eyes. "My sister was a widow too," she said. "They blamed her for surviving, but she did anyway." Mary pressed the woman's hand into the fabric. "Then part of her is here too." That night, the quilt stayed on the bench under the stars, not folded, not hidden. And Mary, wrapped in it, slept without fear, for the first time, not as someone starting over, but as someone fully home. The clouds came sudden and angry, piling over the coast like a mob long denied. By dusk, the harbour swelled, ropes strained and shutters clattered like warning bells. Drift End had seen storms before, but this one moved with a cruel rhythm, aimed not just to rattle, but to take. The villagers hurried to batten down their lives. Mary secured the windows of the sewing shed while Elias stowed crates of dried goods in the cellar. The wind screamed through the narrow lanes, and the sea rose in jagged fists. Mary had faced worse, but never with so much worth saving. This time, she had a home, a name she chose, a man who never asked her to shrink. As the storm roared, she huddled with others in the fishmonger's cellar, wrapped in her own quilt, holding the trembling hands of a mother she barely knew. "Will it take the roof?" the woman whispered. Mary looked upward, then shook her head. "Let it try, we'll build again." And she meant it. That night, wind tore the dockside apart. Elias's small boat was damaged but not lost. Some stalls collapsed, one chimney fell. But by morning, as the sky softened into a bruised peace, Drift End stood. The village pulled itself from the mud, not with mourning, but with laughter, with help, with firewood passed hand to hand. Elias found Mary sweeping water from her doorway, her dress damp, her eyes alive. "You didn't break," he said. "Neither did you. I had a reason." He reached into his coat and pulled out a parcel, soaked but intact. Inside was cloth she'd never seen before, silk, deep green, embroidered in a pattern of waves. "For what you'll make next," he said, "whatever you want it to be." She touched the fabric, breath caught. "I thought storms took everything." "Not everything," he said. "Not this time. Not you." That evening she hung the quilt outside, still damp, but full of light. And for the first time in her life, a storm had come and gone, and left her untouched. Her name had not been spoken in shame. No one had knocked with blame. She had passed through the worst of it and remained, whole, seen, enough. The wind still blew, but it whispered now, and it whispered her name with peace. She stitched it slowly, like a prayer, not for show, not for pride, just to mark a truth finally earned. Her name, Mary Hensley, in golden thread across a deep blue square on the corner of a new quilt, her fingers moving steady as the tide. It was the first time she'd ever signed anything. Her marriage license had been signed by trembling hands, her household deeds signed by Thomas, her grief signed by silence. But this was hers, alone. Drift End had begun to call her by name, not whisper, not shadow. She was Mary the Stitcher, Mary who stayed, Mary who stood when the storm came. She didn't correct them, for once. She didn't need to explain. Word of her work had spread beyond the coast. Traders came asking for the quilts with stories. Women arrived with scraps and scars, asking if she could sew their past into something warm. She never said no. Each patch held meaning. A widow's apron, a girl's bonnet, a sailor's old sleeve. She stitched them together like lives that refused to unravel. One afternoon a letter came, no return name, just an unfamiliar seal. Inside was a single page. You were never to blame. We know that now. Forgive us. The village of Grendale. It had taken years. Gossip turned to guilt, shame into silence. But even from afar, it arrived. Elias read it with her, then offered only one word. Closure? Mary shook her head. Number A, footnote. That night, she walked to the edge of Drift End with the new quilt folded under her arm. The tide was low, the stars clear. She stood on the shore, toes in the sand, and held the quilt up to the wind. I am not the widow, she said softly. I am not the blamed. She laid the quilt over a driftwood bench, left it for the next soul who needed warmth. And when she returned home, she began another. This time not for memory, for legacy. As Elias lit the fire and poured tea, she sat down, reached for needle and thread, and began again. A name, a wave, a sun rising from stitched horizon. Mary Hensley, seen, not sold, loved, not feared. A woman who was not rescued, but rebuilt, stitch by stitch, wave by wave. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more redemptive tales from the heart of Old England here on Echoes of England. If your name had been buried in blame, how would you reclaim it? Tell us below. Your story matters too.